Today was a busy Friday for a burial vault installer and a headstone cleaner. I've got 2 headstones that just need some light cleaning this morning before I clock in for work. I've got a weekend and a Monday full of vaults to prep in the shop, and a 3 p.m. ETA around an hour and 45 minutes away. So I began my day around 5 a.m., got to the shop, and grabbed my headstone cleaning equipment and headed out to the cemetery. And you may notice that the headstones I'm cleaning today don't need a whole lot of work. What they really need is to be cleaned up from the mowing crew and to get the excess grass off of the stones that are stuck from the mowing process. In cases like these, when a friend of mine reaches out, I gladly offer to do these headstone cleanings for free. They don't take much time, and it doesn't require me to use D2 biological solution, which is my main expense as a headstone cleaner. On a headstone like this, I'm mostly just concerned with getting the grass off, some bird droppings, and just a little bit of excess dirt off the foundation. So I use a dilution of Dawn dish soap in a gallon of water, usually around 20 parts water to 1 part dish soap, and use a horsehair brush, the softest brush they make, and really just lather up the stone with dish soap, loosening up all that grass that's stuck on and getting rid of the bird droppings. This is a polished granite bench, and the only part that had any type of algae growth or bacteria growth was on the sides where it's not polished and on the nameplates where it's not polished. But there wasn't much at all to clean up, just a little bit of dirt buildup. But when I'm done with this headstone cleaning, I will spray the nameplates and the sides of the unfinished granite to make sure that in the future, when the grounds crew is mowing and leaving grass on the stones like this, that leaving the grass won't let algae build up on the sides. D2 will prevent that from happening for at least a good couple months. When using a dish soap dilution on a headstone, it's super important to use tons and tons of water and make sure all of the dish soap is removed from the headstone. And while I don't believe too much in the woo-woo and spirituality and things like that, I am religious, but I thought it was pretty unique how, as the sun was rising during this headstone cleaning, the sunlight was coming right through the trees and shining directly on my friend's mom's headstone. Once all the water was cleaned off, and I dried any of the excess on the very top, I wanted to give the top of the bench a little bit more of a shine with some granite polish. Now I only use this granite polish on the areas that are polished. If it's applied to the nameplates where it's etched, it will look a little bit greasy and it doesn't quite shine as white as it does without any type of solution on there of any kind. One thing I always focus on is making sure that all the ornaments and decorations all get put in the exact same place, even if I can do a little bit of a cleanup on them. For headstones such as this, and the one that I'll be cleaning in just a minute, most of what I'm doing is just cleaning up after the groundskeeping crew. This cemetery is run by the city, and it appears as though, like a lot of cemeteries, they don't blow off the excess grass after the mowing's been completed. And it's unfortunate, but sometimes family members do have to come out on a regular basis and do the trimming and blow off all the grass themselves if they want to keep the stone looking new. It doesn't damage the stone, but having the grass dry onto the stones can sometimes leave stains from the dead grass, and when the grass is wet and it's cut, it'll stick to the stone as well and dry, and it's pretty hard to get off. I actually worked the funeral for this person in December of last year. In our childhood, we went to the skating rink together, and as adults, had some drinks a time or two. And one thing I can say about Casey, she had an infectious personality about her. You couldn't help but smile if you were around her. And it was probably one of the hardest services I've done because I knew a lot of the family and a lot of the people that were in attendance that day. As a Vaultman, my job there was just to make sure that I did my part, making sure everything went without issue, and did what I could to just help out the family in such a tragic situation as this. So for headstone cleanings like this, when friends ask me if there's something I can do, of course I don't charge, and I get to it at my earliest convenience and try to make these headstones look a little bit better so that when the family comes to visit, they don't have to think about coming back out with equipment and water and everything it takes to clean a headstone. I can just get it done for them, and when they come out to visit, they can focus on spending their time with the person they lost rather than worried about having to clean up the stones at a later time. And by doing headstone cleanings like this once a year or once every other year, it really helps keep anything from growing on the stones as well. If you can tell, this is a cemetery with a lot of trees surrounding it, and cemeteries that are surrounded by trees are notorious for having growth build up on the stones in the fall when the leaves fall and everything's blowing around and getting stuck to the sides of the stones. A lot of times that's how you get that initial algae buildup. So keeping them clean once a year, once every other year, can really help prevent all that growth that you oftentimes see on the sides of the stones where the granite is not finished. But now that I've got my headstone cleanings for the day completed, I clocked in around 7:45 and I got to work prepping our burial vaults for Saturday, Sunday, and Monday services. Now this is a Tri-Guard estate, which is the baseline level of a sealed burial vault for Tri-Guard burial vaults, and this is a Wilbert cream-colored Venetian. The Venetian has a flat top that ends up being covered with a plastic carapace, and if you're a follower of my channel, you've probably seen many of this type of vault being installed out in the cemetery. There's almost no limit to the customization that we can do on the carapace of a Wilbert Venetian or one of the metal line vaults, like the stainless steel, copper, bronze triune, as well as our Wilbert Tribute and our Wilbert Citadel. Later on in the video, you will see this Wilbert white Venetian set ovation style with the carapace customized with some yarn for knitting. The covers of the carapace can be customized in almost any manner of ways. For example, my grandfather's burial vault had a farm scene with a red barn in the background, and it had an International Harvester tractor right in the middle. Now, my grandpa wouldn't have been too happy about that, so on the computer in the shop, I removed the International Harvester and rightfully replaced it with a John Deere. And then on the right hand side, opposite from the barn, we placed a portrait of my grandfather, with his full name, birthday, and the date that he passed. Now the burial vault cover on these Venetians and the SSTs, the Citadels, and the Tributes are all exposed concrete, and before we're able to put a carapace on, we need to use a rubbing stone to sand smooth the top of the concrete to make sure that any specks of gravel or concrete don't put a pinhole style dent rising upwards out of the carapace. So we'll get that cleaned off, round the edges, and make sure that the carapace fits tightly. Now Tri-Guard burial vaults are designed slightly different when it comes to the seal. And by slightly different, I mostly mean about a 1/4 inch of a difference between the depth of the groove on a Tri-Guard vault versus a Wilbert. For Wilbert vaults, the seal is installed into the liner upside down before the vault is poured. On a Tri-Guard burial vault, the groove is slightly more shallow, but it's also wider as well. So if the seal is installed before the manufacturing process, it has a tendency to allow a little bit of concrete liquid to slide underneath the edge of the liner and cover up that seal, which caused us to have to do a little bit of a clean out afterwards, and it makes more sense for us to install the seal after and use the weight of the lid to press the seal in place. This is the same process we use on our Wilbert Monarchs, because Wilbert Monarchs can also be used as grave liners. Some funeral homes prefer the domed lid of a Monarch over the flat top lid of a grave liner. And this is my other Tri-Guard estate that I'm prepping this morning, and it will have the same process done. The first thing we do is raise it up and apply a butyl adhesive primer, which helps the actual seal stick into the liner of the lid, even though it's upside down and gravity's working against it. For the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'll let that primer get tacky and go on to painting some other vaults in the meantime. This Wilbert cream-colored Venetian is going to be painted russet and gold. Russet is one of Wilbert's more standard burial vault colors. It works really well with a gold or bronze highlight and matches up really well with wood-colored caskets. Most Venetians are two-toned, so whatever the highlight color, which will go over the russet base coat, we will match with glitter on the top of the lid, and it really helps this vault lid shine out in the sun. Now that the primer is tacked up a little bit, I can now add the seal to the other Tri-Guard estate. Now obviously, a burial vault seal is adhesive by itself without the primer, but when working against gravity, we need to have it placed correctly, and then we leave the protective film on the backside so that we can set it down onto the base. This is what fully presses the seal into place, and once the lid sets down with that 1,000-pound plus amount of weight on the top, the seal will be fully adhered to the cover, and it will also place an indentation into the cover that helps the burial vault slide perfectly into place when it is time to seal the vault. So basically, inside the seal, it has a predetermined groove. Once we remove that tape, and once it seals, it's not coming off. To keep the vault from sealing in transit, we use corner supports that slightly separate the lid from the base, and it makes it easier for our lid carriers to slide into place when we go to install the burial vault. It's now time to move on to the Wilbert Monarch that we need to have prepped for tomorrow's service. The Monarch is two different styles of burial container in one. Some cemeteries prefer the thicker domed lids, and some funeral homes prefer the look of a Monarch over the look of a flat top grave liner. While this is not a lined burial vault, it is a burial container. We do install a seal to make sure that the base adheres to the lid. So even though it does get a seal, it is not a sealed burial vault. The reason why some people choose a Wilbert Monarch over a concrete grave liner is because it has the customization options that a concrete grave liner does not have. It can be painted any color, and it has a nameplate and an emblem. And just to show you what it looks like out in the cemetery, this is one of my favorite paint jobs that I've done when I've been given permission by a funeral home or a family to customize a vault myself and try to make it look like what the family's asking for. I was told by a funeral director that the family wanted something patriotic, and with a Wilbert Monarch, there's not a way to put a highlight, because I would have gone with a veteran blue burial vault with a silver highlight, but there isn't a texture on a Monarch, so I decided to get just a little bit creative with it, and I tried something out and it turned out really fantastic, and I was super happy with the outcome. I feel like as a vault company, we should do everything in our power to give every family a different style of personal graveside service, including the colors of the vault and different personalization aspects of the vault. So anytime I do get the chance, I try to harness my creative side and do something personal for a family, like camouflage colored burial vaults like this standard camo, or camouflage burial vault for a woman that was white, silver, and pink. We've also done sports themes burial vaults, farm style burial vaults, even a burial vault for a young man that I laid to rest in Lafayette, Indiana, who was a fan of the Slytherin house in Harry Potter, and I did my best to match up the Slytherin house colors to his burial vault. It also never fails when I'm working in the shop getting things prepped. If the shop foreman shows up, nothing goes right, and I look like an idiot.
I'm doing this fine all morning without a belt. As soon as you walk over here, we'll go home.
I am blessed to work with a really great group of guys, though, who all care for the families and all work together as a team to make sure that all the work gets done properly and no one's making the job harder on anybody else. And to be honest, you have to have that in this line of work. We've only got 7 guys on our crew, and when things get really busy, it's all hands on deck and nobody can be slacking. There are some days where we have as many as 14 services and everyone's running around like crazy, and we all know that if one mistake gets made, it's not going to be good. Either somebody's going to have to leave the service that they're working and compromise their own setup to go help someone else, or a full committal service may not be set for a family member if someone makes a mistake, and that's not something that we find acceptable. Of course, accidents happen and things break on the job. That's why we try to make sure that every Vaultman is not only trained to do the job, but also fix situations that are incredibly complicated to make sure the committal service can get done on time for when the family arrives. And I do realize while editing this video that me shaking that bucket was incredibly comical. But this is something I've been waiting to show on my channel. This type of paint is called orchid tone, and I wish it was a color that we use more often. Just by chance today we're painting 2 vaults, this orchid tone color, and when it dries it has this rose gold type of shimmer that's really pretty, and it looks even better with a silver highlight over the top. And there are some caskets that match up to this color really well, and they have stainless steel accents on the sides, and it's just a really beautiful color in general. And since it's a new bucket, I'm just dipping the roller. When it comes to painting these burial vaults, the concrete is slightly porous on the exterior, so we're not shy with the paint in any way. We'd much rather have too much paint on a vault than too little, but we do want to make sure that we get rid of all the runs and make it look like a professional paint job, which means wiping off all the excess paint from the liner if any gets in between the lid and the base, and making sure there's not just big clumps of paint running down the side on any part of the vault. This Continental is being painted orchid tone with a silver highlight, and the 6 screws that you see on the top of the lid, those will have decorative handles that I'll be painting here momentarily. The Wilbert stainless steel triune, copper triune, and bronze triune all used to have handles as well, and some vault companies still use those, but most companies have moved away from them. Some companies still use the handles on the metal line vaults, and they also use the 3-dimensional emblems. Me personally, I prefer that method. It makes the lid stand out a little bit more, and the 3-dimensional emblems that they get are also beautiful as well. But most vault companies, including ours, use a decal when it comes to the cross or the emblem, and decals when it comes to the nameplate as well. We do have one funeral home that requests that we use the 3D emblems, and I prefer those myself. I think the decals look perfectly fine on the Venetians and the plastic line vaults, like the Citadel as well, but for the stainless steel, copper, and bronze, I feel as though they should have a 3-dimensional, physically bronze or physically stainless steel nameplate and emblem. But I don't own the company, I'm just a worker. I make my opinions known, but after that, it's up to the boss man. And I think he's finally coming around, and we've been ordering more 3-dimensional nameplates and emblems for the stainless steels, coppers, and bronzes. Which is something else I'm thankful for with this job. I've got a really good boss, and the owner of the company is good to me as well. Since I have a headstone cleaning company, my boss will send the headstone cleaning jobs my way, and when someone reaches out for a repair or a replacement of some part of a headstone, I can send those jobs his way. They know I take pride in my work, and I really care about this company, to the point where they asked me to care for the person who used to own this company when she was laid to rest in a Wilbert bronze. That person was also related to our current boss, so it was an honor to be asked to work for his family, and my boss's father recently passed away, a good man named Gary, who I've had many conversations with, and I was asked to do that service for my boss's father as well. So even though I don't own a part of this company, I'm not a partner of any kind, I still treat this small business like it's my own. And after all, taking pride in your work is just something you should have in general. Whether you're making burgers, which I used to do, or you work funerals for families across Illinois and Indiana. You should always take pride in what you do, and do the best you possibly can. But for this morning, my time for prepping vaults has run out, and it's time to load up my burial vault for the day and head out to service. Today I'm installing a Wilbert white Venetian with a custom print that will be set ovation style. The ovation service is a patent held by Wilbert, and no other vault brand can use it. It's a presentation method for the burial vault where the lid is leaned down on rails in front of the family rather than pushed back away. And if the family is going to purchase a high-quality burial vault like a Venetian, it's only right that they're able to see the personalization options that they chose and work with the funeral home on. So this presentation, in my mind, is genius. But if you saw my video from the other day, you probably know what I'm doing, and I'm making sure that there is absolutely no slack in my winch line that lifts and lowers the burial vault over the grave. On my first service with this Johnny handler from True Rebel Equipment, I did not check the line, and there was plenty of slack. So when I went to lower the vault over the grave, the slack let loose, and the vault dropped and bounced around a foot in the air and scared me half to death. So even though this vault cart is functioning exactly how it's designed to, and it's a fantastic piece of equipment that I'm more than happy with, I'm going to be careful and make sure that I cross my T's and dot my I's when it comes to using a heavy piece of equipment like this. When cable lines, like the one that's in this winch, are brand new, they have a tendency to let loose and give slack. So all I need to do is make sure that the slack is released and that the line is tight all the way through the reel. I've now been working since 5 a.m. and it's now 10 a.m. and let's make that hour and 45-minute drive across the state line and find our grave for our setup today. And it appears as though the spouse of the person that I'm laying to rest today was also buried in a Wilbert Venetian. Whether we're using a burial vault Hilljoy or a vault buggy like I'm using today, the first step of any committal service setup is placing the vault over the grave before we begin the vault swinging process. and using a vault buggy is pretty straightforward. We begin by lining up the buggy, even with the end of the grave or the side of the grave, and then extending out the boom. We level out the boom and make sure that the vault isn't going to take off at a downhill angle away from the front of the buggy. This Johnny handler has a winch system as well that helps pull the winch out over the grave. Once it's aligned over the grave where I would like it, I start to slowly lower it down and make sure it's aligned in between my boards and it has space on each end in between the 4x4s. Aligning the vault perfectly at this step of the process eliminates more work in the future, so I'd rather take my time now than having to adjust the vault side to side or end to end when it comes to suspending the vault over the grave. And since I have a headstone that's generally near the front of the buggy, I'll go ahead and collapse the boom in before driving it away. If there's nothing in the way, I can drive the vault buggy forward and collapse the boom in later on when it's away from the vault. Next, we can remove our harness, secure it down to the buggy, and move the buggy out of the way for when the service arrives. It's our policy as a vault company to park as far away as possible, but to where we can still see the service coming, so that we can be up there and ready to stop the hearse. As a vaultman, our main responsibilities when the funeral is present is to stop the hearse where we need them to. We need to let the funeral director know which way the casket needs to come to the graveside, whether that be feet first or head first, and also collect the funeral flags. Some funeral homes use stickers in the windows, but others use magnetic flags that sit on top of the cars. So as the service takes place, we will walk around and collect those flags for them, and then stay graveside to make sure that if the family wants to watch the lowering process, that we are there and available, and the funeral director doesn't have to come looking for us to get our attention to be able to perform that service in front of the family. The setup process today is what's referred to as the Wilbert Way ovation. In general, the Wilbert Way means that we suspend the vault base over the grave with the lid pushed back on rails. In my opinion, this is the only way to set up a burial vault so that the family can have full view of the vault that they chose at the funeral home, whether the family chooses a concrete grave liner that costs a few $100, or the Wilbert bronze, which can run over $10,000. The display process should be the same. And the first step of that process is setting our feet. The feet are a stainless steel mechanism with gearing on the interior that allows the vault to be raised and lowered from one end of the feet using a one-man bar connecting the two to raise them both and lower them both at the same time, allowing one vault man to do this job. And I do know that some vault companies still use 2 men per truck, and personally I don't see the need for that, but I understand when people talk about safety concerns. Now when I do my recording, I use my cell phone, but even when I'm not recording, I have my Bixby activated on my S23 Ultra to make sure that if I ever need to call out and call 911 for any reason, that my phone is right there and available. But for a job like this, it just takes some common sense to make sure you don't put yourself in a position where you could be hurt. At any given time, the ground could collapse around this grave, which is why I always tell the new vaultmen that you don't want to get in between the lid and the base unless necessary. You also want to do your best to disperse the weight of the burial vault away from the edges of the grave as much as possible. All the stories that I've heard of vaultmen being seriously injured, and in the extremely rare circumstance, those who have lost their lives on this job, most of the time it's when dealing with the vault cart or when the vault is suspended by a buggy or a boom truck of some kind. It's usually not during the swinging process, it's the placing process using a Hilljoy, vault cart, or a boom truck. I am pretty cautious when it comes to doing anything dangerous on this job. I've got a wife at home, 2 kids, and a baby on the way. The last thing I want to do is either put myself out of work or worse. But as a matter of full transparency, I have been pretty severely injured twice on this job. The first time I was fairly new and I wasn't as comfortable letting funeral directors and cemeteries employees know what I needed from them and to let them know what I was doing. So while lowering a vault in front of the family members, I began taking the lowering device off. And since I've been here as long as I have, and I've worked over 3,000 committal services, I personally prefer to do the work when it comes to lowering a vault myself. I don't need help, and having help only speeds it up by maybe 30 seconds. And getting the job done quickly is not what I'm trying to accomplish when I'm lowering a burial vault in front of the family. So what happened is I removed the straps, I tightened down the lowering device after the casket was safely at the bottom of the vault, and I was ready to remove the lowering device from the rails. So when I remove the lowering device, I pull two heads of the device off the rails, and I get inside of the lowering device and straddle it to lift it off the rails. To do that, I need to be either facing the front of the lowering device or the back of the lowering device. And I was not aware that there was a cemetery employee behind me. When I lifted up in the middle of the device, making sure that it was balanced, he lifted up on the other end. And with that pressure of him lifting up, it launched me and the lowering device forward. And unfortunately, my hand was underneath the device and it landed on top of the lid rail. I won't get too into detail, but my index finger is what caught the weight of myself and the 110-pound lowering device, and it was my finger in between a metal rail and the metal device, and it basically peeled my index finger like a potato. Luckily, the cemetery employee let go when I began to fall, and I was able to move slightly to the left, making sure that the lowering device didn't fall on top of the casket. So I was able to just pick it back up, move it over to the side, and throw on a pair of gloves and continue with the lowering. It wasn't until I got back to the truck and took the glove off that I knew how bad it really was. But it's part of the job. I'm now more careful when it comes to lowering a vault in front of the family, and I make sure that if someone's there and I'm not sure if they know what they're doing, I make it 100% clear that I can handle this part of the job and that I don't need assistance. Truth be told, that young cemetery kid was just trying to give me a hand, and while I do appreciate it, I wasn't ready for it. The other instance when I got injured was entirely my fault, and I'm extremely lucky. It really could have taken my life or crippled me in one way or another. I had a day down in Terre Haute, Indiana, where I had a 10 a.m. graveside and a 2 p.m. ETA. Now, the difference between a graveside and an ETA is that the graveside starts when the time says on the paperwork, and an ETA is a general estimation of when the funeral procession might arrive. Now, gravesides can run very, very long because the entire funeral is at the graveside itself, and ETAs might not be accurate. So they may have a 1 p.m. ETA, but they might not show up till 2:15 or 2:30, depending on the preachers, the speakers, and what the family chooses to have happen at the church or funeral home, and they may arrive somewhat later than the ETA. Now, for this service, the 10 a.m. graveside lasted about an hour and 45 minutes, and it was a beautiful day, so no one was in a rush to depart and move on to the luncheon or the repast. So for my second service, that 2 o'clock ETA, I was in a little bit of a crunch for time. Now, this was back before I used the vault buggy. So I had two vaults on the top of my truck, and I had to maneuver the hill joy underneath the second vault. And when doing that, the metal bar that I was using to move the hill joy around slipped out from its slot, and I fell backwards off the top of my truck, landing directly onto my back with a wooden box that I used to support the vault on one side and a headstone on the other. My left elbow caught most of my weight on the wood box, but I could tell I broke a little piece of my elbow off, and my other side landed on the headstone, which basically made my entire right leg go numb for about 4 days. Completely and entirely my fault. So, it's only a dangerous job if you're rushing and don't pay attention. Now that story time is over, it's time to return to the setup for the day. It's Wilbert White Venetian. And it's time for the process that is, hands down, the most difficult part of the job. Now, every family has their own traditions, and I do not judge. It's at this time that the service has concluded. The family has multiple choices at this moment. They may either witness the lowering of the casket and the sealing of the burial vault. They may move on to the luncheon or the repast and let me lower the casket and seal the vault with the supervision of a licensed funeral director. But the family may also witness this part of where the casket is lowered and the vault is sealed. They can allow me to move some of my equipment out of the way, and the family can throw a few ceremonial handfuls of soil onto the vault itself. There's also another option that some families choose, is to watch the casket be sealed and lowered. I can move my equipment, and the gravediggers can leave the dirt pile behind the burial vault, and the family can fill the grave by hand. If the family desires any of these options, they can make it clear to the funeral director. One thing that breaks my heart about creating this channel is hearing the stories of so many families who were denied the right to be able to see this process occur and denied the right to be a part of this process as well. Here in the Midwest and Central Illinois and Central Indiana, it's extremely common for us to lower and seal the vault and have the family fill the grave by hand. In our area, I've never worked with a funeral director who would deny the family the right to see any of this process. And to be honest, it really breaks my heart, because for my grandfather's service, I did every aspect of the closure of the grave. That being said, this process is too much for some people to watch, and I totally respect that as well. Grief does not have a time frame. Sometimes people can accept the inevitable that their loved one has been lost and that they're on to a better place, and some people may need years to cope with the fact that someone they loved is gone. I'm a pretty libertarian-minded person, and I believe that whatever your wishes are, as long as possible and communicated properly with the vault company and the funeral home, we can accommodate basically everything that a family has asked of us over the years. When it comes to the actual sealing and lowering process, as you saw now, the casket is lowered into the bottom of the vault using the blue straps of the lowering device. Each Wilbert burial vault has raised ridges at the base, which allow us to add slack to the blue straps of our lowering device and shimmy the straps out from each end of the casket. Once the straps have been removed, the lowering device can be tightened back down, the pistols raised, and the lowering device pulled off of the lid rails and removed from above the casket. This is an ovation service, and the lid weighs in excess of 1,100 pounds, so we use the Wilbur Ovation winch to pull the lid over the top of the burial vault. Without this winch, it would be nearly impossible to raise this lid back up over the base. Part of the way that a Wilbert burial vault seals is the weight of the lid itself. The butyl adhesive seal that lies in the groove of the lid is displaced when the tongue of the base enters the seal. Many people believe that the concrete itself is what provides the seal, and that's not the case. The concrete is a protective outer shell that protects the plastic interior. The plastic interior is then sealed using the butyl adhesive seal, and the concrete protects that seal from being altered, moved around, or damaged underground. And I have said it before, and I'll continue saying it, the primary purpose of a burial vault is to preserve the soil above the grave. If a metal or wooden casket was placed in the ground without a burial vault, over time, as the casket deteriorates, the ground above will settle, requiring more top filling, more seating, and it's not a process that happens instantaneously, so that will have to be upkept for decades to come. With a concrete burial vault, once the ground has settled, the few months after the burial, it will not settle again. Burial vaults are used for many other reasons. That is primarily why cemeteries require burial vaults in general. And as you can see, the base has been raised into the lid, the seal displaced, and the burial vault is sealed. We can now remove the winch, the lid carriers, and the lid rails, and lower the burial vault to its final resting place. And while no funeral I've ever worked has been happy, there is something that is beautiful about lowering the burial vault and seeing the burial vault of this person's spouse already interred and having a feeling that they're together again. In my experience with lowering burial vaults in front of family members, it's at this moment where the finality of the funeral becomes apparent. It is the final step of the funeral process, lowering the casket and the vault into its final resting place. This is the reason that so many families choose to watch the vault be sealed and lowered, and why so many families choose not to watch. It's the fact that they're just not ready to see the part where their loved one is lowered, and I totally understand that. But I also understand personally what it means to watch your loved one being lowered, as I've done for so many friends and family members. To me personally, it is final. It is real, and it is absolute. For me, it's a necessary part of the grieving process. At a young age, I lost my best friend, and I wasn't there to watch her funeral, and I always thought that I'd get a call from her one day, and obviously that never occurred. The grieving process is extremely difficult, and it varies from person to person. As a Vaultman and a vault company, it's our goal to make sure we accommodate the family in any possible way that we can. I have had individuals reach out to me privately, letting me know that showing this part of the funeral process was something that they weren't given the opportunity to do, and that a video like this helped them know what happens after they leave the cemetery and don't see this. It's my honor to provide that for those who have lost someone and did not get that final moment of closure. While this can be emotionally and physically a very hard job at times, I know that the job is nothing compared to what the family is going through. So as the vault is lowered into the grave, the last step is to remove the cables from underneath and begin the process of tearing down my equipment and waiting for the gravedigger to arrive. And this concludes a long Friday for a Vaultman and a headstone cleaner. 14 hours of work completed, and I can go home knowing that I did the best that I could today. I was able to clean some headstones and bring them back to the way they should look when the family comes to visit. I was able to prepare all the vaults for this weekend for my co-workers to install and service for the families, and work a committal service with a beautiful Wilbert White Venetian for a woman who lived a long, long life and had many, many stories to tell before she passed. And before I go, I'll say one more thing, quoting hundreds of different preachers across the United States that use a poem referred to as the dash. On every headstone, there is a birth year and a birth date, and between those dates is a dash. That dash represents all the time they spent on this earth. And now, the family and the friends are the only ones who know how much that little line is worth. It's how much we lived and how much we loved. If we could just slow down enough to understand what's true and real, and do our best to understand how other people feel. And while your eulogy's being read, with your life actions to rehash, would you be proud of the things they say about how you spent your dash? Take care. God bless.